The black limousine pulled up to the small diner on Maple Street just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Evelyn Whitfield watched from behind the counter, her blonde hair pulled back in its usual neat bun, one hand instinctively rising to touch the scar that ran from her left temple down to her cheek. At 28, she had perfected the art of turning her face just so, letting her hair fall forward to hide what she considered her greatest shame. The man who stepped out of the limousine was nothing like their usual customers. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair impeccably styled, and everything about him spoke of wealth and refinement. Margaret guessed he was in his mid-30s, probably lost or making some kind of business call. Men like him didn't eat at places like Eddie's small diner. She turned away quickly, positioning herself at the coffee station where the scarred side of her face would be hidden from view. Her heart hammered as she heard his footsteps on the worn linoleum floor, the gentle chime of the door announcing his arrival to the handful of afternoon regulars who looked up with mild curiosity. "Good afternoon," came a warm voice behind her. "Might I have a seat at the counter?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee into a fresh cup. She had no choice but to turn around. This was her job, her livelihood, the only work she'd been able to find since the accident 3 years ago. She kept her chin down, her left side angled away from him as she set the coffee cup on the counter. "Menu's right there," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Today's special is meatloaf with mashed potatoes." The man settled onto the red vinyl stool with an ease that seemed to fill the space around him with calm. "Thank you, miss." He paused, waiting. "Evelyn," she replied, still not looking up. "Evelyn Whitfield." "Well, Miss Evelyn, I'm Charles Pemberton. And I have to say, this coffee smells absolutely wonderful." She risked a glance at him then, keeping the right side of her face toward him. He was even more handsome up close, with kind brown eyes and a smile that seemed genuine. Not the kind of smile she was used to receiving, the pitying ones, or worse, the startled looks when people first noticed her scar. "Charles Pemberton," she repeated softly. The name was familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. "Are you from around here?" He chuckled, a rich sound that seemed to warm the diner's fluorescent-lit atmosphere. "Not exactly. I'm from the city, about 2 hours east. But I have some business in town." He took a sip of his coffee and closed his eyes appreciatively. "Now this is coffee. You don't get coffee like this in those fancy downtown places." Evelyn found herself almost smiling, then caught herself. She turned back to the coffee station, busying herself with wiping down equipment that was already clean. "What can I get you to eat, Mr. Pemberton?" "The meatloaf sounds perfect. And please, call me Charles," as Evelyn called the order back to Eddie, the gruff cook who owned the place. She became aware that Charles wasn't looking at his phone like most customers did these days. He wasn't checking emails or scrolling through anything. He was simply sitting, observing the diner with what seemed like genuine interest. "How long have you worked here, Evelyn?" he asked when she refilled his coffee cup. 3 years, she answered, still keeping her scarred side turned away. "Since I moved to town." "And where did you move from?" The question was asked so gently, with such genuine curiosity, that Evelyn found herself answering despite her usual reluctance to share personal information. "Chicago. I needed a fresh start." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what we need. I've been thinking about that myself lately." When Eddie rang the bell, Evelyn placed the steaming plate in front of Charles. The meatloaf was Eddie's pride and joy, thick and hearty with a perfect brown glaze, accompanied by a mountain of creamy mashed potatoes and green beans that actually had flavor, unlike the overcooked vegetables most diners served. "This looks incredible," Charles said, and Evelyn could tell he meant it. "Would you mind keeping me company while I eat? I'm afraid I'm not used to dining alone." Evelyn's first instinct was to decline, to retreat to the far end of the counter where she could busy herself with inventory or cleaning. But something in his voice, a loneliness that echoed her own, made her hesitate. "I suppose I could," she said quietly, positioning herself carefully so he could only see her right profile. As Charles ate, he asked her about the town, about the diner, about simple things that most people never bothered to ask. His questions weren't intrusive, just genuinely interested. Evelyn found herself relaxing despite her nervousness, even laughing when he told her about his first attempt at cooking for himself after moving out of his parents' house. "Burned water," he said with a self-deprecating grin. "I actually managed to burn water. Had to call the fire department." "That's impossible," Evelyn said, forgetting herself enough to turn toward him slightly. "I assure you it's not. When you leave an empty pot on high heat long enough, spectacular things happen." It was then that Charles's gaze fell on the left side of her face, on the scar she'd been so carefully hiding. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She started to turn away, started to retreat into the shell she'd built around herself, but something stopped her. There was no shock in his eyes, no pity, no careful politeness masking discomfort. He simply looked at her as if nothing had changed. "That must have been quite an ordeal," he said gently. Evelyn's hand flew to her cheek, covering the scar. "Car accident," she whispered. "3 years ago. The other driver ran a red light. I'm sorry that happened to you." The simple words, spoken without drama or excessive sympathy, somehow meant more than all the elaborate condolences she'd received from others. Evelyn found tears threatening, but they weren't tears of shame for once. They were tears of relief at being seen, really seen without judgment. "I should get back to work," she said, starting to turn away, but Charles's hand gently caught hers, the one she'd been using to hide her scar. His touch was warm, steady, completely without pity or awkwardness. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you are a beautiful woman. That scar doesn't change that. It's simply part of your story, and every story worth telling has chapters that test us." The tears came then, silent ones that she couldn't stop. No one had called her beautiful since the accident. She'd convinced herself that no one ever would. "Again, I hide it," she whispered. "Every day, I hide it. I can't bear the way people look at me." Charles's thumb gently brushed across her knuckles. "What if I told you that hiding from the world means the world misses out on knowing someone extraordinary?" Evelyn looked up at him then, fully facing him for the first time, scar and all. "You don't know me, Mr. Pemberton." "Charles, you don't know anything about me. I know you make the best coffee I've had in years. I know you're kind to a stranger who wandered into your workplace. I know you have a laugh that could light up this whole diner. And I know you're brave enough to start over in a new town when life knocked you down." He paused, his hand still holding hers gently. "What I don't know is why you're working in a diner when you clearly have so much more to offer the world." Evelyn pulled her hand back, but gently, not in rejection. "This is all I can do now. Before the accident, I was a teacher, but standing in front of a classroom, having children stare at me, ask questions about my face, I couldn't handle it." Charles finished his meatloaf thoughtfully. "Children are actually more accepting than adults, in my experience. They're curious, yes, But they don't carry the same judgments we do. Maybe, Evelyn said, but I couldn't risk it. Teaching was my life, and I loved those kids, but I couldn't bear the thought of being a distraction. What if I told you, Charles said carefully, that I might have an opportunity that could change that? Evelyn looked at him skeptically. What kind of opportunity? Charles reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Evelyn read it and nearly dropped it. Charles Pemberton, Chairman, Pemberton Foundation. The Pemberton Foundation, she knew that name now. They funded educational programs across the state, built schools, provided scholarships. You're that Charles Pemberton, she said, her voice barely audible. Guilty as charged, he said with a smile. And I'm here because we're opening a new learning center right here in town. We need someone to run it, someone who understands what it means to overcome challenges, someone who can help children who feel different or left out. Evelyn stared at him, her mind reeling. You're offering me a job? You don't even know if I'm qualified. I've been watching you for the past hour, Charles said. I've seen how you handle yourself with grace under pressure, how you make every customer feel welcome despite your own discomfort. I've seen kindness and strength and intelligence. As for qualifications, I had my assistant do some research before I came here. Research? Evelyn's voice was sharp with sudden worry. Nothing invasive, Charles assured her quickly. Just public records. I know you have a master's degree in elementary education from Northwestern. I know you were teacher of the year in your district before the accident. I know you left a job you loved because you thought you couldn't do it anymore. Evelyn felt the tears threatening again. How did you even know I was here? Charles smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. My mother, he said. She lived here for the last 2 years of her life, in the care facility on Oak Street. She used to talk about a young woman at the diner who always made sure she got her coffee just right, who would sit with her when she was having a difficult day. She said this young woman had the kindest eyes and the gentlest way of speaking, and that she had a scar that she tried to hide but shouldn't because it made her look like a warrior. Evelyn's breath caught. Mrs. Eleanor? Eleanor Pemberton was your mother? She was, Charles said, his voice thick with emotion. And she talked about you constantly. She said you reminded her of herself when she was young, beautiful, intelligent, but convinced that one flaw defined her worth. Evelyn remembered Mrs. Eleanor clearly. The elegant elderly woman who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering black coffee and a slice of pie. She had been one of the few customers who never seemed to notice Evelyn's scar, or if she did, never treated her differently because of it. She was lovely, Evelyn whispered. I was so sorry when she passed. She left me a letter, Charles continued, to be opened after her death. In it, she made me promise to find the young woman from the diner and make sure she knew that her kindness to a lonely old woman meant the world. She also made me promise to help you see what she saw, that your scar isn't something to hide from the world. Charles reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She wanted you to have this. With trembling hands, Evelyn unfolded the letter. It was written in Mrs. Eleanor's careful script. My dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, then my son has found you as I asked him to. I want you to know that in my final months, your kindness was a light in dark days. You have a gift for making people feel seen.